What's up, everybody? It's time for our detailed breakdown from all of my matches at Spotlight Atlanta. So I'm going to go through a few things here. First off, the deck list, how I came up to the numbers that I came to. Um, Go over all of the matches that I had, including like sideboarding for those matches, any interesting decisions that came up, the results, and then finally anything that I'd change going forward with the list, including cards that I'm looking at from the new Lorwyn set getting ready to release, so that you can have an idea of the future direction of at least my testing with Dimir Midrange and Standard. So first off, let me jump to the smaller screen. What you got up here right now is the exact 75 that I ended up registering at Spotlight Atlanta. Ended up going 9-5-1 for 84th place. Not the most thrilling finish, but it did end up netting positive on the payout side, so I can't complain too much. The list itself, I'd probably say like 66-ish of the 75 is pretty stock. Some of the changes that I did make, I was on 1 stab and 2 tragic trajectory for a good bit of the testing. Ended up dropping the stab because although it's really good on the play against the Simic or Boroid deck if they have a mana dork on one, I think that's about the only time that it's better than Tragic Trajectory. I had enough games where I needed to like Trajectory and Ouroboros or a Quantum Riddler or something like that that Stab couldn't interact with. That I found myself leaning more towards just going all in on Trajectory, not caring so much about Stab. It does hurt a bit in the mirror, having an instant speed way of dealing with like a Flood Pits or a Malcolm, Bat, Tidebinder or something, so they can't untap a Ninjutsu and a Kaito is a big deal. Like I mentioned, if you're on the play against the Cub decks, it kind of hurts right there because you can't play a land, stab a mana dork, untap, have your second mana for a Bat, Malcolm, Flood Pits, blah, blah, blah. And it's a little bit worse into mono red because they have just so many creatures that you need removal spells for. But it is a little bit worse, in my opinion, if you're ever on the draw, which knowing my luck of die rolls is going to be a lot. And I do think it's a little bit worse against some stuff like the scam decks, the Is It Prowess deck, when you want to kill things like Drake Catcher, Fear of Missing Out, kill a Quantum Riddler, things like that. So I was willing to make that sacrifice. I was on 3 Cecil for a minute. The day of the event, like the morning of, I ended up dropping the 3rd Cecil to go up to the 3rd Malcolm. A big part of that was the sideboard plan, which we'll get to momentarily, for the Simic matchups. I wanted more ability to filter through my draws to find the stuff that I want to find, to be able to keep attacking into board stalls on the ground. And I felt like Cecil is very underwhelming in a lot of my testing. There's times that you've got a Cecil on the battlefield and you can attack in, but it's not really like, it's not flipping, and it's against creature based decks. And when they're ready to attack in, say they have a board of allies or an Ouroboros or whatever, they don't really care about you trading Cecil off with one creature. They're just going to attack around it for a large chunk. And then you're going to take a 2 additional damage off of that for this, or after that, for the Cecil block. So I was not very thrilled with Cecil pretty much over the course of the weekend. There was literally one single game in 15 rounds that Cecil flipped. One game the entire time. And I don't think it was ever relevant outside of that one game. Spyglass Siren, great. Fantastic enabler of Kaito. Helps you get the land drops. I'd never go less than 4. Essence Scatter over Phantom Interference. This was in large part because of the green decks showing up. The Simic Cub decks and the mono green landfall decks, just their ability to get to a point where they can pay for Phantom Interference extremely quickly made it so Essence Scatter being able to catch stuff later. There were enough games where like I had an opponent go turn one Dork, turn two Cub, turn three Cub, or like Mockingbird, and be able to start casting Ouroboros and uh, Quantum Riddlers and pay for Phantom Interference. And I didn't want to deal with that over the course of the weekend. So swap the interferences out for Essence Scatters. Does make you a lot worse into decks like Lessons. I kind of think that matchup is awful anyway, so I'd rather focus on flipping the Simic matchup into positive than trying to spend a lot of time and resources like making the Lessons matchup really good. 4 Flood Pits Drowner, another really great one into Simic. Also just like a good flash threat to enable Kaito. 3 Malcolm Alluring Scoundrel. This is one, like I mentioned, there was a list that was floating around in the European spotlight that was on 3 Malcolm. Saw that list the morning of deck registration, so Saturday morning, and decided like, okay, I've already been high on Malcolm. Somebody else is doing well with it in Europe. I'm going to play it here, and ended up registering the 3rd copy. Malcolm was fantastic all weekend. It's not only a Kaito enabler, but it's a great way to filter some of the dead cards, especially game 1, where you might see like some extra Flood Pits Drowners against Storm Chasers talent, or you might see an extra Kaito. You might see an extra like Bat or something you don't need late game and filter that into something better. The fact that you get to draw your card before you discard to inform that discard decision is really, really nice. But absolutely big fan of Malcolm. The fact that it gives you another threat that can attack, I'm going to put in quotes, profitably into Spider Manifestation, the one green red hybrid 2/2 with reach, is a plus. So ended up on the 3 copies of Malcolm. 2 Bitter Triumph, 2 Shoot the Sheriff. I think it's like most people are in that 6 to 8 removal spell. So 2 Bitter Triumph, like a Shoot the Sheriff, 2 Tragic Trajectory, a Stab, something like that. I ended up on the 2/2/2 split. 3 Deep Cavern Bat. This one's a little bit different. I like Bat, but I think there's too many matchups where like Iroh's Demonstration comes into play, or now that all of the Simic decks are running the Spider Manifestation, there's a lot of matchups where Bat comes down and you just can't do anything after it comes down. Like it takes a card, you hope they don't top deck something good, and then the Bat's not really attacking. So I was a little bit lower on the Bat this weekend, but I didn't want to cut it, mostly because it's a safety net. Like I'm still fairly new to Standard, wasn't sure of all the decks out there. So Bat's kind of the ability to interact with your opponent regardless of what they're on. If you don't know all the cards they have available, then Bat's pretty good. And then it was closed deck list day 1. So opponent wouldn't know I'm on Dimir. I might be able to sneak in a Bat, take something impactful off of a sketchy keep. 4 copies of Tashana's Tidebinder. I don't think I ever wavered off the full 4 copies. I think the card is so good. It's got relevant text in every single matchup in Standard. And it's, again, a great Kaito enabler. Shut something off, get Kaito down, shut something else off, or just use it to beat face. If your opponent's not doing anything, flash in a Tidebinder, get an extra 3 points of damage in, or flash it in, ninjutsu Kaito off of it, still have the ability to use it later, even if you didn't use it right that second on the first cast. 4 Kaito, 3 Curiosity. I think Kaito is absolutely busted as a Magic card. I saw lists going on like 4 Curiosity, 3 Kaito, and a 4th Kaito in the side. I don't think there was ever a point that I even like considered that, unless I was running 4 copies of Azure Beastbinder. If I was on Beastbinder, Curiosity was looking a lot better. But any of the builds without Beastbinder, I wanted to be on 4 Kaito. So many decks struggle to answer it. The stun is extraordinarily relevant, especially if you're on the play. Um, the red removal pretty much unanimously misses Kaito, especially if you tick it up to 5 loyalty as soon as it comes into play. Can clock your opponent extraordinarily fast. So there were plenty of games that like I would have a disruptive hand, get a Kaito down, and then just start ticking up, like not worry about the draw and just close out the game in like 2 or 3 attacks. Or buff up a bunch of emblems, get a soul stone going, and attack my opponent for like 12 out of nowhere. So definitely for Kaito, I think it's just best 3 mana play the deck has access to, which was another reason I kind of wanted to lower the curve. I was testing a lot with 24 lands instead of 25. Malcolm allows you to dig a little bit deeper. Playing 3 Cecil allowed you to lower the curve. And then Kaito's a lot more of a 3 drop than a 4 drop. There's plenty of times that you do hard cast him, but in most games, if you're on the play, especially, being able to like flood pits down a 2 drop, untap Ninjutsu and Kaito, start ticking up, just pulls away with the game so quickly that you'd rather do it on 3 than 4 if you have the chance. The mana base, 4 islands, 5 swamps, 4 Gloom Lake, 2 Restless Reef, 4 Water Grave. The Fountain Port Soulstone split, I've seen plenty on 3 Soulstone, 0 Fountain Port, but Fountain Port's really, really nice in some of like the mid-range mirrors, or it's nice when you need to have a little extra dig to try to find sideboard cards. And like I mentioned earlier, being on the 3 Malcolm, I really valued being able to find my sideboard stuff. The only main deck stuff I didn't register was like Azure Beastbinder. Found the card really underwhelming with Kaito especially. So you play your Beastbinder out on 2, you attack in on 3 to shut something down, and then you ninjutsu Kaito, pick up your Beastbinder. Now you're replaying Binder on 4 and not attacking with it on or until 5. So your opponent gets like 2 turns off of Beastbinder activations. And there's very, very few matchups or few scenarios that you have the ability to ninjutsu and Kaito on like 3 and you don't take it. So I wanted to make sure I didn't have a lot of spells that were making that worse. In the sideboard, 3 copies of Annul, mostly for the Lessons matchup. Like I said, with Essence Scatter over Phantom Interference in the main, only 3 copies of Bat. Needed some extra help for Lessons out of the board, so that's where the 3 Annul, Duress, 2 Soul Guide came from. I was on 1 Soul Guide, 1 Ghost Vacuum, but the Vacuum just like wasn't able to keep up with the graveyard well enough. When your opponent's putting like 2 to 3 Lessons in their graveyard per turn, and your Ghost Vacuum's eating 1 card, it's still going to get overwhelmed by accumulated wisdom. Soul Guide kind of stopped that. 2 Flash Freeze, again, for the Simic decks, as well as like Mono Green Landfall. I would occasionally bring it in. I'd bring it in against Blue-Red, the Scam version with like Furnace, Frostcliff Siege, some of that stuff. I usually wouldn't bring it in against Lessons, and I wouldn't bring it in against Prowess, but I bring it in against the Scam version. 2 Preacher the Schism. This was a little bit of a sideboard juke for the red removal. So if opponent's got like Iroh's Demonstrations or stuff like that, Torch the Towers, I could board out some of my X1s and bring in Preachers just for a little more toughness. Not be able to like wipe my board with a Demonstration. They'd have to kill just my Preacher or kill my X1s and let my Preacher stay back. And then finally, the 4 Wrath effects, which I know seems like a ton. 3 Day of Black Sun and a Rise of Sozin, which if you haven't seen this card, it's a pretty cool one. 4 and 2 black, ETB, destroy all creatures. Then the second chapter, you get to what's the card? Not surgical. Um, uh, one a blue and a black. You name a card and take all the copies. Surgical, it would have to be in the graveyard. Rise of Sozin just lets you take anything. So being able to take like Quantum Riddler, Ouroboros, Nature's Rhythm, something like that, it's going to get your Simic opponent back in the game. And then finally, chapter 3, you flip it into a 5/5 with Menace and Firebending 3. And then whenever it hits somebody, you get to pay X. So it makes 3 mana, hit them, and you can reanimate a bunch of stuff out of their graveyard. So it turns into a 1-card combo, 1-card win condition against the Simic decks. This was like the card, this and the 3 Wraths were the main reason I went back up to 25 lands, just to make sure I could reliably cast my Wrath effects against Simic post board. So that's the 75 that I ended up registering. Let's go through the matchups real quick, and I'll let you know if there's anything interesting that happened in them. Round 1 was against Dimir Blink. It was like one of the scam Riddler decks. So Riddler, Splash Portal, Storm Chaser's Talent, Boomerang Basics, Thunder Trap Trainer, all that stuff. But Dimir instead of the Is It variant. The first game was just a situation of like opponent saw a couple Boomerang Basics and a couple Storm Chaser's Talent, but I had some removal. I had a quick Kaito. I was able to start kind of beating down there, found a bitter triumph for a Quantum Riddler. Game 2, pretty much the same deal, except Day of Black Sun's really good for clearing up otter tokens. I think opponents stumbled a little bit there, and I was able to like Tidebinder a Storm Chaser's Talent to get back a Boomerang Basics. We had a judge call during one of these games. So if you're unsure of this interaction, when Storm Chaser's Talent levels up, so like go to the level 2, you pay to activate the ability. The chapter trigger or chapter counter, like you pay to activate the ability. When the ability resolves, the chapter counter goes up. When the chapter counter goes up, there's a triggered ability that's then placed on the stack to get back a card from the graveyard. If you Tidebinder the activation to put the chapter counter on, or whatever lore counter, whatever kind of counter it is on Storm Chaser's Talent, then you stop them from putting the second counter on it altogether. So they can pay again and activate it and put the ability on the stack. If you let them pay, put the level 2 counter on there, and then the triggered ability goes on the stack for moving to level 2, and you Tidebinder that, then it's at level 2. They can't pay 4 mana again to get an instant or sorcery back. It's already got a second counter on. So the only option is to go up to level 3. The judge call we had was about, I specified when my opponent went to activate the Storm Chaser's Talent that I wanted to let the activation resolve and then the trigger go on the stack, and I wanted to Tidebinder the trigger. So when my opponent a couple turns later went to activate it again and pay 4 mana, and I said they couldn't, it was already level 2, they couldn't go up. We had a judge counter or judge come over, confirm that was the case. Really weird interaction, but yet again, Tidebinder great. Round number 2 was against Jonathan on Simic Ouroboros. So Jonathan is the founder, the head of Team Pillow Fort. Really, really nice dude to play against. Jonathan, if you end up watching this, go Ducks. We had a really, really short match. This was actually the one match against Simic that I lost all weekend, side events included. One match I lost against Simic. Game 1, Jonathan's on a multi like 5 on the play and has got Mana Dork. I don't have a Tragic Trajectory into Cub plus Mockingbird the Cub. and I've got like some piece of interaction on my turn too, like flood pits down a land or something. Nothing exciting. I don't have any wraths in the main, and he's able to find some payoffs after that, like warp a quantum riddler the next turn, draw two, find something else to play, and I fall so far behind right there. Not really surprising. Game one, I don't really have a plan established for the matchup. Sideboarding's where all my good tools come in. Against the Simic Ouroboros deck, my sideboard plan's very, very straightforward. I'm bringing in four Rise of, or four, yeah, three Day of Black Sun, a Rise of Sozin, two Preachers, two Flash Freeze, and boarding out four Spyglass Siren and four Kaito. I want the Flash Freezes for the green spells. I want the Preachers to be able to help dig for my Wrath effects, as well as be a big death touching body. I want the Day of Black Suns and the Rise of Sozin to sweep up the board. The Spyglass Sirens, I'm not a big fan of because one, they get swept up in Day of Black Sun. Two, they're not attacking through the spider manifestation. And then the Kaitos come out because I'm cutting Spyglasses and I'm bringing in a bunch of sweepers. There's a really good chance I'm not going to have something on board to ninjutsu or to enable it. So I would rather leave that on the sideline and focus more on sweeping the board and playing out like my big card advantage spells. Game two, I'm on the play. I've got a really good start with like a removal spell for a 1 mana play, removal spell for counter for a 2 mana play. I think it was something like I played land go, he played land go, I played land go, he went for a cub, and I had a flash freeze into untap, play a preacher on an empty board, which is like perfect start for me post board. And preacher ended up drawing like 4 cards. I found a curiosity, found a bat, was able to draw a couple cards off that, and just never saw a wrath effect. So eventually he was able to overwhelm with cubs, like cub, nature's rhythm for another cub, mockingbird a cub, make bunch of mana, crater hoof. I just couldn't find a wrath effect. I was getting very flooded on like Malcolms and bats and things like that that weren't really impacting the game. Curiosities. So GG's to Jonathan. Round 3 was Brandon, also on Simic Ouroboros. Did end up getting this one 2-1. Really nothing of note. I know game one, there's some very, very interesting hands that can kind of cheese out the Simic matchup where you're able to flood pits the lands that they earthbend or Kaito stun the lands they earthbend and really keep them off of mana. That's what ended up happening game 1. Game 2 just kind of overwhelmed. I think I mulled to like 5, maybe 6, and just didn't see spells that lined up in time. And then game 3, Day of Black Sun's great. Wrathing away the board after you're able to get down Malcolm to get a little bit of value, take out your Malcolm, follow it up with like kill your follow-up play plus another threat. And that's usually plenty. Round 4, I do not want to butcher my opponent's name, but they were on Dimir Bounce. So the first round I played against Dimir Blink with splash portals. This round was against Dimir Bounce with fear of isolation, nowhere to run, Grim Bobble. Game 1, I was able to win on the back of Kaito. I saw that a bunch of their interaction couldn't actually kill Kaitos. Like they had some nowhere to runs and Grim Bobbles and stuff, but I didn't really see a lot of bitter triumphs. So Kaito was able to come down and kind of go unanswered. Game 2, they ended up winning through just a bunch of boomerang basics and Storm Chasers talents, like triple of both, something like that. A really go wide board. and I didn't bring in as many wrath effects as I thought I should have, or I thought I needed. And then game 3, we have a really interesting judge call. I'm in a pretty good position where I've got like double Tidebinder down attacking, some other threat like a Flood Pits attacking. Opponent's around 7-ish life and plays a Legend of Kuruk, which, if you don't know, is one of these Avatar Avatar sagas. Let's see if we can find this thing real quick. Legend of Kuruk. Legend of Kuruk. Legend of. I probably don't have any in my collection. That's why. Okay, this thing. So opponent plays Legend of Kuruk, and I'm really wanting to keep pressuring with the Tidebinder. I don't want them to find an answer here. This is like their only card in hand. So I decide to Tidebinder the Chapter 1 triggers. They don't get to scry, draw a card. Opponent passes back to me. I get an attack in. I pass back to my opponent. They draw for turn. Pass back to me. I go to my turn, attack. They go to their turn, draw, and go to cast a spell and stop and say, if I kill the Tidebinder, does the Legend of Kuruk trigger? And this is where we have a really weird spot. So I've got to pull up the paper copy of the Legend of Kuruk because it looks different than the arena copy, which is very, very important. So my opponent's asking, if he kills the Tidebinder, does the Legend of Kuruk trigger right away? I say it doesn't trigger until the next opportunity for it to tick up, which is true for creature sagas. I thought Legend of Kuruk was a creature saga because the paper version has got this little 4/3 down on the bottom. I know you can't see my mouse, but right below where it says exile this saga, then return to the battlefield transformed, it says 4/3 right below that. So I thought when I was looking at this card upside down that it was a creature on the battlefield and would lose abilities because that's what the entire Final Fantasy Tidebinder rules change was about with these saga creatures. My opponent thought that Tidebinder removed the ability of enchantments. So he thought it wasn't triggering because I'd Tidebindered an enchantment. I thought it wasn't triggering because Legend of Kuruk was a creature. And the judge comes over and basically tells us we're both idiots. So the fix here is, since the entire last turn cycle went through and both of us missed it, we both got a game rule violation, which I completely understand and agree with. This turn, the legend should be on chapter 3, but we can't just skip from 1 to 3. So we rewind to the main phase before anything's put on the stack, tick it up to chapter 2, and resolve chapter 2. Now, the plus side of this is I don't think it mattered that it wasn't on chapter 3, that it was still on chapter 2. I had interaction, like the turn before, I got to draw off of a curiosity and like a Tidebinder and stuff. I don't think it would have mattered, but it's a really weird situation to be in where nobody knows what our cards do. And we're both really, really, really bad at this game. So anyway, that's the judge ruling we got. We finished up our match after that. I was able to attack through Tidebinders. I think my opponent had like two Storm Chasers talent tokens down, but I'm attacking with like 2/3/2s, a 4/3, and something else. And they're at like one life at this point after last turn's attack. So able to get that one, but really awkward judge call. Round 5 up against another Simic Ouroboros deck. This was Jacob, another Team Pillow Fort member, another extremely nice individual. Game 1, I believe he mulled kind of hard, like mull to 6, mull to 5, something like that. And I got away with it with the typical flood pits down your lands, ninjutsu kaito, take out your lands, blah, 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 blah. Game 2, I saw like one of the perfect curve outs against Simic Ouroboros with like removal spell for your 1-drop, flash freeze on turn 2 for something, and then sweep like Preacher into Sweeper. One of the really nice things about Preacher in that matchup being a 3-drop, you can Day of Black Suns for 2 to take out the Spider Manifestations and the Mockingbirds and the Cubs and all that. Take out the lands. I know they come back, but get them away from the blockers. And then be able to keep your Preacher around and just keep attacking. As long as you have a removal spell or something for Ouroboros, or you can just Tidebinder the Ouroboros and then sweep everything up for 2, and you don't really care about the Ouroboros if there's no creatures on the battlefield. Round 6 up against Craig on Golgari Midrange. So when we started playing game 1, I thought my opponent was just on like a fair mid-range deck because I saw some removal spells. I saw Maelstrom Pulse off a bat. I saw Sentinel of the Nameless City, Restless Cottage, stuff like that. And I ended up very, very luckily clawing back into game 1. Opponent had a reasonable start. I found like a Kaito to stun down a Sentinel. So the swing point of this game was like turn 5 or something. I've got a Kaito in hand that I want to play. My opponent has got 3 lands and a Restless Cottage. So 4 lands total, 3 and a Restless Cottage. And they've got an Esper Origins out on the battlefield that they escaped from their yard that's going to be making 2 mana this turn. So I have the option to play out the Kaito and stun down the Origins. And if they want to kill my Kaito, they have to animate the cottage, use up their entire turn to animate the cottage, attack into the Kaito. The downside of that is I think my only other card in play is like a Flood Pits Drowner or something, or it's not even a Flood Pits Drowner, it's something that's not doing anything relevant here. I don't even think it was a creature. It might have been like a map token or something. So I have the choice to stun down the Esper Origins and hope my opponent just spends their entire turn attacking back at the Kaito and I can find something else. I decided to play the Kaito and tick up and make an emblem. It basically creates the exact same scenario where if they want to kill the Kaito, they have to animate the Restless Cottage, attack both creatures at Kaito, take their whole turn out of play. My opponent goes to their turn, they make their 2 mana, and then they use the 2 mana in one of their tapped lands to cast a Sentinel of the Nameless City or whatever, the 3 mana green Sentinel that makes a map. So I thought they were going to try to map onto the Esper Origins and try to swing it lethal for Kaito. And they don't crack their map. They just go to combat, attack in on the Kaito, put him down to 1, and then play a follow-up of something something that like, oh no, they played a follow-up of a Kaito of mine that they got off of a Cruel Claw heist. So they play a Kaito of their own. I go to my turn, pick up Kaito, make an emblem, and end up like, it was over the next 2 turns. I end up finding like a bitter triumph for a creature. That's what it was. I killed their Sentinel. Kaito kills their Kaito. I play a new Kaito that gives me Void to be able to Tragic Trajectory their last creature in play. The Esper's Origin sacked itself the next turn. So I was able to like clog up the ground and take up the new Kaito so that it didn't die to the cottage attacking back. And from there kind of ran away with game 1. Game 2, opponent saw a 2-lander, kept it. I don't think ever saw a 3rd land, and I ended up just pressuring with like Malcolm into Tidebinder into Curiosity, something like that. I didn't find out until later because apparently someone else I rode with played the same person, that they were on Golgari Landfall. They were on like World Wagon and Harmonizer and all that, and I just never saw any of those cards out of them. So really unfortunate draws on their side. Round 7 was against Chris Dennis, who ended up, I believe, might have been top 32, definitely top 64, in a Dimir Midrange mirror. Game one was like fairly back and forth, but he got down a Kaito and I didn't, so he got that one. Game 2, I ended up having the tempo outplay with like 2-drop into 3-drop into double 2-drop or something interaction. And then game 3, he got a Kaito in off a Soulstone Sanctuary on like turn 5 or something. And I didn't have an answer to Kaito. He was able to stun down my 1 creature on board and run away with it after that. Game 3 was just a situation where like he saw 2 man lands, I saw 1, and his man land was a Soulstone Sanctuary while I'm sitting there with like a Shoot the Sheriff in hand. So GG's there, not much to write home about. Round 8 against Ari on Is It Prowess? But this was like a heavy prowess trigger variant. It's on Drake Catchers, but then like Ops and Torch the Towers and all this to like trigger the prowess triggers a lot. So Storm Chaser's talent, Fear of Missing Out, Drake Catcher, bunch of 1-mana instants and sorceries. And I was not prepared for Drake Catcher. Like, sorcery speed, Tragic Trajectory looks really, really bad into your opponent going Frostcliff Siege into Drake Catcher. I also made a mistake one turn where I I attacked into a Drake Catcher with a Soulstone Sanctuary. He made a Drake, and I was like, okay, well, that's fine. And then blocks and says, go to damage. And I'm like, yeah. And he says, all right, they trade. I had forgotten about Frostcliff Siege, making the Drake a 3-power creature to trade off with my Soulstone. And that hurt a lot because I had a Curiosity on board at that point. Or I had like a flipped Curiosity, enchantment Curiosity. So I got very, very run over that match. I think game 2, I had a spot where I might be able to get out of it with a Day of Black Sun. He had a counter spell for that. So I was 6-3 at this point, or 5-3. I had the loss to Simic Ouroboros in round 2, the loss to the Mirror round 7, the loss to I'm going to call it Is It Drake's round 8 there. So I'm going into my last round of day 1. Need a win to advance to day 2 and sit down across from my opponent. He wins the die roll and goes turn 1, Meticulous Archive, Surveil, pass. And I'm like, oh, thank God. So Jeskai control for the very last round of day one. Um, Game one, I see like triple Kaito that eventually gets there. Usually against Jeskai, as soon as you get like the first or second get lost on something that doesn't matter, you know the Kaitos are probably going unanswered. So you like get lost, I think a Malcolm, and then get lost maybe a Cecil, and I finally find and able to get down a Kaito and it goes unanswered. Game two, I actually did end up losing to a Voice of Victory on the draw, which was the card that kills me. If anytime I lose a game to Jeskai control, it's either game one because I see too much spot removal, or it's game two or three to Voice of Victory on turn two and I don't have an answer. I think that's like the only card out of that deck I ever lose to. Game three, I'm back on the play. I've got a really good hand of like duress into bat into some threat like a Malcolm into Kaito and just start running away with it. So end up getting that one. 6-3 at the end of day one. Good enough for advancing to day two. Start off day two with another Simic Ouroboros match, which nothing of note. I do the thing game one. This was kind of funny. Game one, I do the thing of flood pits down, stun down your land. Second flood pits, stun the land again when it's getting ready to untap, like kill some other creature, kill an Ouroboros. Ninjutsu and a Kaito, stun down the land again. Flood pits, stun down a dork. And just really keep them off of mana, keep them off of being able to progress to get to any big spells. And my opponent says something along the lines of, man, nobody did that yesterday. Like I played against Dimir a couple times and nobody stunned down a land. I don't know why not. I like you not being able to cast your spells. So really funny to see there. Game two was like the stereotypical way I draw it up post board, which is interact with something on two, stop an explosive turn, get down a card advantage engine like a Preacher or an Enduring Curiosity, and then turn four, if my opponent doesn't have an Ouroboros out, just Wrath for two. If they do have an Ouroboros, then wait till turn six and Wrath away everything. Assuming you can fight over what they do in the meantime. Round 11, I got absolutely smoked by Is It Lessons, round 11. Not even close. I mulled to 5, both games 1 and 2. Nothing I did lined up in any sort of meaningful way. Like game 1, he's got artist talent on turn, like grand into artist talent into monument. Nothing I could do game 1. Game 2, I've got double annul in my opener, and opponent's got the grand on turn 1. I don't have a removal spell for it. And I end up like missing my 4th land drop for a couple turns. Finally find it, cast a Kaito. Opponent boomerangs my Kaito, untap, play the Kaito again, boomerangs it again, untap, play it again, boomerangs it again. Like, yep, can't do anything about that. So GG's to them for that one. Round 12, I finally get paired against Mono Red. I hadn't seen Mono Red all weekend, didn't see Mono Red in side events on Friday, finally ran into it. But it was an interesting build. Opponent had no copies of Nova Hellkite in the 75. They had 4 Magebane Lizards in the main. So like all in on the cheap, get you dead stuff. The problem with that build in this particular matchup is I don't care about Magebane Lizard. That thing doesn't trigger when I ninjutsu a Kaito, doesn't trigger on Curiosity, doesn't trigger on Tide Bindering something. So by all means, I looked at opponent's list post board and realized they did not have a single red exile effect for Curiosity. They did have 4 copies of Needlehead in the main, but no like combustion techniques, no obliterating bolts, nothing like that. So kept in my curiosities, boarded out the Kaitos, and just put focus on getting dudes on board to keep their stuff at bay and eventually win through card advantage. Um, Round 13, I'm up against another mono red player that I had sat next to 2 rounds previously, who said that they watched the content. So that was really awesome. So, Patrick, if you watch this, hopefully I don't recap this story incorrectly. So we got paired into each other this round, kind of had like a little joke about that there. Game 1, Patrick's on the play, has got a pretty deep mulligan, like a mold of 5 or something, trying to find something that gets out on the front foot. Unfortunately, I just have a really good game 1 hand of like trajectory, shoot the sheriff, bitter triumph, flood pits into like a Kaito with some lands. So it's able to really dispatch a mold of 5. Game 2, we have a big judge call. We're getting to a point in like the late game where I've got a couple creatures on board, like a flipped Cecil. I told you there was one game the entire weekend that Cecil mattered. This was it. I got a flipped Cecil out and some other creature like a flood pits. Opponent's got a couple creatures out, a hired claw and something else, and goes to cast an Emberheart Challenger. I look at my hand, I've got a Tidebinder and an Essence Scatter, which is important. So opponent casts Emberheart Challenger. I look at my hand, I look back at the Emberheart Challenger, I put my head down and I go, Emberheart Challenger. Like, that's all I say. Just say the name of the card. So opponent looks at me for a second. I'm looking at the Emberheart Challenger, like 3-4 seconds go by and they say pass. And I say, hold up, still thinking on the Emberheart Challenger. And then I realize to myself that them saying pass has influenced my decision. The reason being is they've got a hired claw on board. And if they go to combat and attack, they've got one card in hand. If they go to combat and attack, I can Tidebinder the Emberclaw trigger, then trade the Tidebinder with the Emberheart Challenger if they attack with that, and block the hired claw with something else. Save my Essence Scatter for like a dragon off the top next turn. Or if I think that they're not going to attack, I can Essence Scatter the Emberheart, go to my turn, save my Tidebinder, not have to use it because they're not attacking. And I realize I just gained this additional information. So I call a judge on myself. The judge comes over and I explain like, hey, Emberheart Challenger was placed on the stack. There was a pause here. My opponent said go. I said wait. I'm still thinking on the Emberheart Challenger. And I recognize that because of this like lack of communication, I've gained additional information that I shouldn't have, that they're passing the turn. So the judge kind of looks at me again like an idiot, kind of the running theme of the week or the weekend, and basically says like, so what's the call about? And I'm like, well, I want to know if we can rewind or if like we're good to rewind to the Emberheart Challenger being on the stack, or is there an issue with like me gaining this information that opponent wants to cast or pass the turn? And the judge is like, well, did you say Emberheart resolves? I'm like, no, I just said the name of the card. So the judge rules that because I haven't signaled that I want the Emberheart to resolve, my opponent hasn't confirmed with me that Emberheart resolves, the Emberheart is still on the stack, and that's the point of the turn we're at. We went and talked to the head judge after the event, and there were some really interesting points that were made that I thought would be kind of fun to share with everybody listening to the video in case you run into a similar situation. First off, the judge said that the amount you wait for a spell just doesn't matter. Like, if you put a spell on the stack, I can wait for 10 minutes. There is no point where it's assumed that that spell resolves. Obviously, people want a shortcut in Magic all the time. You got an upkeep trigger. A lot of times you just resolve it real quick, move on without verbal confirmation from both sides. So that is completely irrelevant. There is no, oh, opponent didn't say anything for 4 or 5 seconds. I assumed it resolved. Got to get verbal confirmation. The other thing, which was really cool, is we had been playing at like a reasonable pace up until this decision, and then I tanked on this decision. So opponent brought up the point of like, we've been playing at a reasonable pace, and then all of a sudden I put this Ember Heart on the stack, and there's not a reasonable pace here. And so I assumed it resolved. So I'll come back here. Which was an interesting point that I hadn't thought about. And the judge kind of said that just because the game has progressed a certain way up until this point, there's no obligation for it to continue progressing at that pace or progressing in that manner. And that was really eye-opening. It's like, things change, plans change, the battlefield changes, expected spells change, happens all the time. But it doesn't mean that you're obligated to do anything the same way that you did before just because you had been doing it that way. You were completely allowed to just change everything about what you were doing as soon as you want, basically. So really interesting judge call. Interesting to talk to the head judge and get their opinion on that. Round 14, I end up in another mono red matchup. So at this point, I am 9-4, I believe. Yeah, 9-4, trying to get to 11-4 because I think that'll be good for top 64 for sure, maybe top 32. Playing against mono red again. Little less exciting on this one. Game 1, I'm on the draw, deep mulligan, like mull to 5. Opponent's got really good start, Hired Claw into 2-drop like Needlehead, into Dragon, into another like Ember Heart plus spell, and I get completely run over. Game 2, I sideboard out most of my Kaitos and Curiosities. Usually I go down to like 1 Curiosity, 2 Kaitos post board. It's mostly because I base it off of like the amount of exile based removal my opponent has. So if they've got enough ways like combustion techniques and stuff to deal with Curiosity, I'll be a little bit lower on that card, higher on Kaito. So I ended up going down to 2 Kaitos, 1 Curiosity. Kept a hand with 3 lands, Tidebinder, like a Flood Pits Drowner, a removal spell, and just go, I think it had a Preacher in there, and just go Kaito, Curiosity off the top. Can't get a threat to stick. They've got a like a shock for my Spyglass Siren, into another kill spell for my 2-drop, into Obliterating Bolt for my Preacher. I cannot stick a threat, and I get stranded at 3 lands. I do find some Tidebinders that tried to save me into some Needleheads. So they had multiple Needleheads. I had Tidebinders for the Needlehead triggers so that I could shut that off. But they were able to get a Sunspine Lynx down. And I, yet again, like the idiot that I am, was completely convinced in my head that Sunspine Lynx was a 5/3. So I attacked into one with a Tidebinder, planning to ninjutsu, stun down the Lynx, and opponent blocks with the Lynx, and I go, cool, well, at least I get the Lynx off the board. And then they go, so 3 damage marked on it, and I look up and realize that the Lynx is a 5/4, and the Tidebinder dies, and now I still have Kaito Curiosity stuck in my hand. So little bit of unfortunate draws not hitting the fourth land, more just me punting that away. I think I just had a mental hiccup after the mold of 5 run over on game 1. So ended up losing round 14 to mono red. Round 15, sit down with my opponent. Um, this one was pretty funny. Opponent really, really nice on Simic or Boroid. We look at the standings and realize that we both believe we're dead for top 64. We're sitting around like 91st, 92nd, somewhere around there. So we think we're dead for top 64 based on the number of people that are guaranteed to be above us on the points and the number of expected people to jump over us based off like the draws. So we decide we're going to draw into top 128. Like we should be able to lock up 128 to draw, get our promo, live to fight another day. And so we agree to that. And opponent goes, well, do you want to play for fun? Sure, why not? I'm here. I got time. Let's do it. And he says something about like, I saw you were on Dimir. I know this isn't a great matchup for you. And I said like, well, if I played against Simic like 5 times this weekend and I'm 4-1 against it right now. I feel pretty solid against it. And he's like, oh, well, what are you doing different? And I show him my list and like, I'm on 3 Day of Black Suns, a Rise in the board, 2 Flash Freeze, Essence Scatters. And it's like, okay, does that make it that big of a difference? I'm like, well, we'll see. So game 1, stun down the lands, run him over. Game 2, Essence Scatter, kill something, sweep the board away, have a preacher going unanswered, just like not even close. And he's like, oh, I'm glad we drew then. It's like, so am I. But it was really funny to see that play out, that the matchup. Again, I think that this particular build has got like a fairly good time into the Simic matchup. So getting to watch that play out multiple times over the course of the weekend was very reassuring, made me feel like I have some idea what I'm doing in the standard space. So anyway, that's all the matchups. Like I said, 9-5-1 finish, which I'm not going to complain about for only really like getting into standard, the current standard like 2 weeks ago, figuring out my 75 in that time frame. Things that I would change going forward. First off, we've got Lorwyn coming out like within a week. So a lot of changes are going to be based off of that rather than anything else. The first big ideas are, is there going to be any room for Bitterbloom Bearer? The current build of Dimir, probably not. I think that the mana is a little bit too awkward to try to fit a double black spell in here. I do think Bitterbloom Bearer is really cool, and I'll probably try a more black heavy build with it. But you don't get access to like the uncommon, the new Lorwyn uncommon Kindred land because we're not running that many fairies, and you don't get access to Cavern of Souls for the same reason. So if you want to keep a lot of the good Dimir midrange cards without going all the way down the fairies path, then I don't think you can just fit Bitterbloom into the current shell. The other 2 cards are Requiting Hex, the 1 black removal spell that kills something CMC 2 or less. I think that's going to see a decent amount of play. In my opinion, it's better than Stab. It's kind of on par with Tragic Trajectory. Being instant speed is really nice. Can take out like opposing man lands that Stab and Trajectory can't do. Can take out like Drake Catchers, Fear of Missing Out, things like that Trajectory and Stab are both missing. So I do think that card's going to see a reasonable amount of play. And then the other card is Lockmare. It's a 2 mana 4/5 that enters with 3 -1/-1 counters. You can pay 1 in a blue, remove a -1/-1 counter from it and draw a card, or pay 2 in a blue, remove 2 counters and stun down an opposing creature. I think that card is 1, pretty good just to play out on turn 2, have the ability to stun something down on 3, attack in for 3, and start getting a clock going. It's also really good with Kaito because you can remove the counters, draw some cards, ninjutsu it out for a Kaito, reset it, remove the new counters, draw some more cards. So it's a really good late game. I've got extra mana play because it can just come down, draw a couple cards right away, and then it's a pretty good beat stick on turn 2 if you're willing to start removing some counters from it proactively, which Dimir doesn't really have access to before this. So Hex, the Lockmare, and Bitterbloom Bearer, I think, are going to be 3 of the cards that Dimir is most interested in taking a second look at. But which one of those actually make an impact for you is going to depend on what cards you're interested in cutting from the list currently, or kind of the pivot you want to make. And that's just going to depend on what the meta looks like after the set drops. Oh, and Spell Snare. How could I forget Spell Snare? I am going to be running so many Spell Snares when Lorwyn drops. I think that card solves a tremendous amount of problems for Dimir, being able to answer things like Needlehead, Emberheart, Drake Catcher, FOMO, Artist Talent on the draw, opposing Bats or Flood Pits Drowners, answer Bitter Triumphs and Get Lost for Kaito, answer Iroh's Demonstrations and Combustion Techniques and Accumulated Wisdoms, and all of these cards that can be hit with that. Badger Mole Cub on the draw. So I will be running a lot of Spell Snares. I think it's got targets in every single matchup. I think it's phenomenal in every matchup. Yeah, don't leave home without your Spell Snares. So anyway, that's a lot of the stuff I'm going to be trying out in the upcoming weeks. I've got an RCQ at the end of the month. I would like to get a 75 finalized after Lorwyn drops before that hits. So expect some more standard streams in the near future. Other than that, if you got any questions, comments, anything that jumped out to you, or if you want to leave any feedback, something that's working for you, something that looks interesting from Lorwyn, let me know in the comment section down below. I'll have links to everything from the Twitch, so you don't miss a live stream, the Twitter, so you know when a live stream's happening, the Discord, if you want to come join the Discord, talk about what's working for you. Love to have you there. Links to all that down below. Hope y'all have a fantastic rest of your week or weekend. Stay safe. Enjoy some good food and company. I will catch y'all back live later. Adios for now.